The morning fog rolled thick across the tarmac at Langford Lodge, Northern Ireland, swallowing the olive-drab shapes of B-24 Liberators lined up like sleeping giants. It was October 17, 1944, and the war had ground men down into something hollowed out and mechanical. Staff Sergeant Thomas McKenna stood beneath the wing of his aircraft, a battle-worn Liberator with the number 42 to 52,463 painted on her tail and the name Lady Luck barely visible through layers of exhaust stains and patched aluminum. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not alone with a letter clutched in his oil-stained hands, the paper already softened from being read and reread 100 times. The words hadn't changed. They never would. Your brother Michael didn't make it. The telegram came yesterday. I'm sorry, Tommy. He was gone before they could get him to the field hospital outside Bastogne. Come home if you can. Your mother needs you. The letter was from his sister, Claire. 3 weeks old. 3 weeks of flying missions over Germany while his kid brother lay cold in some Belgian dirt. 3 weeks of not knowing. The chaplain had told him the same thing everyone said, "You're doing important work here, son. Your family understands." But they didn't understand. And neither did he. Not anymore. McKenna looked up at the B-24. She was grounded for maintenance. Cracked engine mount on the number 3, hydraulic leak in the bomb bay, a dozen other technical write-ups that would keep her earthbound for at least another week. But McKenna was a crew chief. He knew every rivet, every wire, every system in this bird. He'd kept her flying through flak storms and fighters, through frozen altitudes and emergency landings. He could fix what needed fixing. He could get her across. The idea had formed slowly over the past 2 days, growing from a whisper into a roar he couldn't silence. The Atlantic. Westbound. Home. No orders. No clearance. No squadron commander asking questions he couldn't answer. Just fly. Just go. He moved quickly now, his decision crystallizing into action. The maintenance logs sat on the crew desk inside the operations hut, unwatched in the pre-dawn chaos of mission prep for the squadrons that were flying today. He signed off on repairs that weren't finished, forged a test flight authorization with the squadron commander's initials, close enough to pass a glance, and stuffed extra charts and navigation logs into his flight bag. The fuel trucks were already moving between aircraft, topping off tanks for the day's missions. McKenna flagged one down, showing the forged paperwork. "Test flight," he said flatly. "Need her full. Long-range system check." The fuel sergeant squinted at the forms, shrugged, and waved his crew forward. 30 minutes later, Lady Luck's tanks held 2,800 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel. Enough to reach Newfoundland if the winds were kind. Maybe. McKenna climbed into the cockpit alone. No co-pilot. No navigator. No bombardier, radio operator, or gunners. Just him and 30 tons of aluminum, for Pratt & Whitney R-1830 engines, and a photograph of his brother tucked into the breast pocket of his flight suit. The engines coughed to life one by one. Number 1, Number 2, Number 4, Number 3 last because she was always temperamental. The roar built into a thunderous symphony that shook the airframe. Ground crew stood back, watching. A few waved. They thought he was taxiing for a test hop. 20 minutes in the pattern, check the systems, bring her back. They didn't know. McKenna advanced the throttles. Lady Luck rolled forward, heavy with fuel, her tires groaning under the weight. He didn't request clearance from the tower. He just pointed her nose toward the threshold of runway 27, locked the tail wheel, and kept rolling. The engines screamed as he pushed them to take off power. Airspeed climbed, 60 knots, 80, 100. The yoke felt like concrete in his hands, the aircraft reluctant to leave the earth. At 110 knots, he pulled back. Lady Luck staggered into the air, clawing for altitude, her shadow sliding across the Irish countryside below. Behind him, The tower was probably screaming into the radio. He'd already switched it off. The fog swallowed him whole. And then there was only the sound of engines, the compass needle swinging west, and the vast gray Atlantic waiting ahead like a judgment he couldn't escape. 2 hours out, the fog broke. The Atlantic stretched below in endless corrugated iron, whitecaps marching in geometric rows beneath a sky the color of old steel. McKenna held Lady Luck at 8,000 feet, leaning the fuel mixture to stretch every gallon, watching the cylinder head temperatures with the intensity of a man whose life depended on numbers and gauges. Because it did. The loneliness hit him like a physical blow. In combat, a B-24 carried 10 men: pilots, navigator, bombardier, engineer, radio operator, gunners. Voices filled the intercom, a constant stream of chatter and call-outs and dark humor that kept the fear at bay. Now there was only the drone of engines and the whistle of wind through gaps in the fuselage. The aircraft felt enormous and empty around him, a flying cathedral with only one worshipper. He'd plotted a great circle route to Gander, Newfoundland, 2,200 nautical miles across open ocean. No checkpoints. No landmarks. Just dead reckoning and celestial navigation. He had a sextant he barely knew how to use, a chronometer that might be accurate, and charts that showed nothing but blue emptiness between Ireland and North America. At 3 hours out, the point of no return came and went without ceremony. McKenna calculated it twice to be sure. 1,400 gallons burned, 1,400 remaining, headwinds stronger than forecast. Turning back wasn't an option anymore. He was committed. The word felt appropriate. They'd probably court-martial him if he made it back. They'd probably call him crazy. Maybe he was. The number 3 engine started running rough at hour 4. McKenna felt it before he saw it, a subtle vibration through the yoke, a slight yaw to the right. He scanned the gauges. Oil pressure dropping on number 3. Not catastrophic, not yet, but trending wrong. That engine had been problematic since their last mission to Castle, taken flak damage to the cowling. He'd patched it, signed it off, told himself it would hold. He enriched the mixture, reduced power slightly, tried to baby it along. The vibration eased but didn't disappear. The engine was dying slowly, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it except pray it lasted another 6 hours. The sun climbed to its zenith and began its descent toward the western horizon. McKenna ate a chocolate bar from his escape kit, drank water from his canteen, and kept his eyes moving between instruments and sky. The Atlantic remained empty. No ships. No aircraft. Nothing but water and sky and the slow-burning anxiety that he'd miscalculated something fundamental. His heading, his fuel consumption, his ability to fly this beast alone across an ocean. At hour 6, doubt arrived like an unwelcome passenger. What the hell was he doing? He'd stolen a bomber. Deserted his post in wartime. Violated every regulation and oath he'd ever taken. And for what? To see his mother cry over a son who was already buried? To make some futile gesture that wouldn't bring Michael back? But then he thought about his brother's face, the kid who'd followed him into the service, who'd written letters about wanting to be brave like Tommy, who'd died alone in the mud while Tommy flew safe above the clouds in a machine that killed from a distance. There was something unbearable in that distance. Something that needed closing. The sun touched the horizon at hour 7. McKenna pulled out the sextant, tried to shoot a star sight through the astrodome. His hands shook from exhaustion and cold. The numbers didn't make sense. He was either 50 miles north of his intended track, or the sextant was lying, or he was too tired to do the math correctly. He made a small course correction and hoped. Number 3 engine's oil pressure dropped into the red zone as darkness fell. The propeller began to windmill erratically. McKenna made the decision quickly. Feather it. He pulled the feathering button, watched the prop blades rotate into the wind and stop. The drag decreased, but now he was down to 3 engines, fuel consumption increasing on the remaining power plants to maintain altitude and airspeed. Lady Luck flew on, wounded but stubborn, her remaining engines howling into the night. Below, the Atlantic turned black, invisible except where moonlight caught the crests of waves. McKenna trimmed the aircraft, locked the controls as best he could, and allowed himself 5 minutes of closed eyes. Just 5 minutes. He woke with a start to an aircraft shuddering in turbulence and the clock showing he'd slept for 23 minutes. His heart hammered as he grabbed the yoke, corrected for a 15-degree bank, and checked position. He had no idea where he was anymore. The fuel gauges showed 600 gallons remaining. Maybe 3 hours of flight time. Maybe. And then, faint in the distance, he saw lights. Not stars. Lights on the surface. Fixed and steady. Land. The lights grew brighter as McKenna pushed the remaining 3 engines harder, sacrificing fuel economy for speed, for hope, for the desperate need to reach solid ground before Lady Luck drank her tanks dry. His altimeter read 6,500 feet. The lights resolved into a pattern, a coastline, scattered settlements, and something that might be an airfield. He couldn't tell if it was Gander or some other base further south. He didn't care. The moon broke through scattered clouds, painting the ocean below in silver and shadow. McKenna could see individual waves now, their white caps rolling in endless procession toward shore. The distance closed with agonizing slowness. 5 miles, 4, 3. Every second felt like an hour. Every engine vibration sent ice through his veins. He reached for the radio, hesitated, then flicked it on. Static filled his headset, then a voice, crisp and professional. Unidentified aircraft approaching from the east, you are entering restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately or be considered hostile. McKenna grabbed the microphone. His voice came out hoarse, unfamiliar. This is U.S. Army Air Force's B-24, tail number 42 to 52,463. I'm declaring an emergency. I need immediate clearance to land. Running on fumes and 3 engines. Silence. Then, 42 to 52,463, say your origin and mission. McKenna closed his eyes. The coastline was closer now, details emerging from the darkness, rocky shores, pine forests, roads cutting through wilderness. Langford Lodge, Northern Ireland. No mission. I'll explain on the ground. I need a runway now. Another pause, longer this time. McKenna could imagine the confusion in the tower, controllers checking logs that wouldn't show his departure, trying to make sense of a bomber appearing from across the Atlantic without warning, without authorization, without any logical explanation. 463, you're not on any flight plan. We have no record of your departure. Confirm you are a U.S. aircraft. Confirmed. B-24 Liberator. And I've got maybe 20 minutes of fuel left, so unless you want wreckage in your backyard, give me a goddamn runway. The controller's voice changed, became clipped and urgent. 463, you are cleared for emergency approach runway 22. Be advised, this is RCAF Gander. You will be met by military police upon landing. Do you copy? Copy. Runway 22. I'm coming in. The airfield emerged from the darkness like a constellation dropped to Earth, a string of runway lights, tower beacons, the geometric sprawl of hardstands and taxiways. McKenna could see aircraft parked in neat rows, hangars lit from within, vehicles moving along perimeter roads. Normal. Orderly. Everything his flight had not been. He began his descent, hands working automatically through procedures he'd done 1,000 times but never alone, never this exhausted, never with everything hanging in such precarious balance. Gear down. The hydraulic system groaned, protested, then 3 green lights illuminated. Nose gear down and locked, left main down and locked, right main down and locked. Thank God. Thank God. Flaps to approach. Airspeed 120 knots. Trim for landing. But his hands were shaking now, adrenaline and exhaustion making every movement jerky and imprecise. The yoke felt foreign in his grip, as if the aircraft had become something wild and untamable in the final miles of their impossible journey. Number 2 engine coughed. Once. Twice. The sound cut through McKenna's concentration like a knife. He scanned the gauges, fuel pressure dropping on number 2. The fuel warning lights for the left main tank illuminated, red and accusing. He was running on vapor in the left tanks, the right side nearly as bad. "Come on, baby," he whispered. "Just a little further. Just give me 2 more minutes." Lady Luck shuddered, her remaining engines straining, and McKenna knew he wasn't going to make the runway. Not at this rate. Not at this altitude. The math was simple and terrible. He was 2 miles out, descending through 1,500 feet at 500 feet per minute with fuel measured in seconds rather than minutes. He'd be on the ground in 3 minutes whether he wanted to be or not. The question was whether that ground would be a runway or a forest. He pushed the throttles forward, trying to coax more power from engines that had already given everything they had. Number 2's cough became a steady sputter. The RPMs fluctuated. The aircraft yawed right as the engine began producing asymmetric thrust. McKenna compensated with rudder, his right leg straining against the pedal, holding the nose straight through sheer physical force. Gander Tower, 463. "I'm not going to make it. I'm too low and I've got maybe 2 minutes of fuel. I need to put her down now." 463. "Advise you have emergency vehicles standing by. Can you reach the approach lights?" McKenna stared at the lights ahead, calculated angles and distance and hope, and found the answer wanting. The approach lights were still a mile away. He was passing through 800 feet. Number 2 engine was dying in real time, its death throes shaking the entire airframe. Negative. "I'm putting her in the trees." 463. "Eject if you can." There's no ejection seat in a B-24 tower. Brace for impact. The controller's voice came back, stripped of protocol, suddenly human. "God be with you, 463. McKenna didn't respond. He was too busy flying, too busy fighting the controls, too busy making the 1,000 tiny adjustments that might mean the difference between a survivable crash and instant death. He pulled back on the yoke, trading airspeed for altitude, milking every foot of lift from Lady Luck's wings. The stall warning horn began to blare, an angry mechanical scream that filled the cockpit. The trees rushed up, black silhouettes against darker ground, a solid wall of pines and spruce that had stood for decades waiting for this exact moment. McKenna aimed for a gap, a clearing, anywhere that wasn't solid timber. He could see individual trees now, could see their branches swaying in the wind, could see the rocky ground between them. Number 4 engine died first. The propeller stopped, locked in place, instantly transforming from thrust generator to giant brake. The aircraft yawed violently left. McKenna stomped on right rudder, used every ounce of strength to hold her straight. Number 1 died seconds later with a sound like tearing metal. Then number 2 went silent, its final cough echoing through the airframe like a death rattle. Lady Luck became a glider. 30 tons of metal falling through the night with only momentum and prayer to slow her descent. The stall horn scream became the only sound besides wind rushing through gaps in the fuselage and McKenna's own ragged breathing. He had no power, no options, just gravity and a rapidly shrinking window of time. The trees reached for him like claws. He pulled the yoke back as far as it would go, forcing the nose up, trying to pancake her in, trying to spread the impact across the belly rather than driving the nose into the earth. For a moment, Lady Luck seemed to hang suspended, wings level, nose high, falling in slow motion through the last 100 feet of air between flight and earth. Then contact. The belly struck first. Not a tree, but the ground between trees, rocky soil and moss and exposed granite that had weathered 10,000 winters. The impact rang through the aircraft like a giant bell, a metallic scream that overrode every other sound. McKenna's teeth slammed together. His spine compressed. The yoke jerked in his hands, nearly breaking his wrists. Trees exploded around him in a cascade of splintering wood and tearing metal. The left wing hit a pine trunk, 60 years of growth obliterated in a microsecond. The wing sheared off, tumbling through the forest in a shower of sparks and aviation fuel. The right wing followed, caught by a stand of spruce, the aluminum skin peeling away like paper. The fuselage kept sliding forward, plowing through undergrowth, bouncing over rocks, shedding pieces of itself with every impact. The nose dipped. The cockpit windows shattered inward, safety glass exploding across the instrument panel in a glittering cascade. McKenna threw his arms up to protect his face. Something struck his left shoulder, a branch, a piece of metal, he couldn't tell, and his whole arm went numb. His head slammed against the instrument panel despite the harness holding him in his seat. Blood erupted from his eyebrow, hot and immediate, filling his left eye, turning his vision red. The world spun, not the aircraft spinning, but his perception of reality fragmenting into disconnected moments of violence and sound. Metal screaming. Wood splintering. His own voice making sounds he didn't recognize. The tail section ripping away with a sound like thunder. The fuselage folding, buckling, the floor beneath his feet rising up at an impossible angle. More impacts. More violence. More pieces of Lady Luck being torn away and scattered through the forest like offerings to some ancient, hungry god. And then silence. Not complete silence. McKenna could hear wind in the trees. Could hear liquid dripping, fuel from ruptured tanks, hydraulic fluid from severed lines, maybe his own blood. Could hear the tick and ping of hot metal cooling rapidly in the October night. Could hear his own breathing, ragged and desperate, somehow still functioning despite everything. He opened his eyes. He was hanging sideways in his seat harness, the world tilted at a 45-degree angle. The cockpit was caved in on the right side, twisted metal and broken instruments surrounding him like the jaws of some mechanical beast that had tried to swallow him whole. Moonlight spilled through gaps in the fuselage, illuminating dust and vapor that hung in the air like fog. He could smell aviation fuel, sharp and dangerous, the chemical stink so strong it burned his nostrils. Could see vapor rising from ruptured tanks somewhere behind him. Could hear the slow trickle of 100-octane gasoline feeding into the dry October forest floor. Fire was coming. It was only a matter of time. McKenna fumbled with the harness release. His fingers wouldn't work properly. Shock, cold, damage, he couldn't tell which. He tried again, forcing his numb hands to grip the metal clip, to twist and pull. The harness released. He dropped onto the tilted cockpit floor, his left leg crumpling beneath him, white-hot pain exploding through his tibia as the fractured bone ground against itself. He screamed. Couldn't help it. The sound echoed in the destroyed cockpit, pathetic and animal. He bit down on his lip, tasted blood, forced himself to move. Crawl. Get out. Get away from the fuel. Get away before the fire started. The shattered window gaped ahead of him, a jagged opening framed by twisted aluminum and broken plexiglass. McKenna dragged himself toward it, using his right leg to push, his arms to pull, his body leaving a trail of blood across the floor. Every movement brought new pain, ribs grinding, shoulder screaming, leg dragging uselessly behind him. He reached the window, pulled himself through, felt torn metal catch his flight suit, rip through the fabric, slice into his side. Didn't matter. Keep moving. He fell 6 feet to the ground, landed hard on his right shoulder, rolled away from the wreckage through a carpet of pine needles and broken glass. 10 feet from the fuselage, he stopped. Couldn't go further. Didn't have the strength. He rolled onto his back, stared up at the canopy of trees silhouetted against the night sky, and tried to process what he'd just survived. Lady Luck lay broken among the trees like a shot-down dragon. Her back was broken, the fuselage folded in the middle where it had hit a particularly large pine. Both wings were gone, scattered through hundreds of yards of forest in pieces small and large. The tail section lay 70 feet away, upside down, its vertical stabilizer driven into the ground like a grave marker. The nose was crushed, the cockpit where he'd spent the last 9 hours reduced to a twisted cage of metal and shattered instruments. She'd carried him 2,200 miles across an ocean without orders, without clearance, without any reason except one man's desperate need to be somewhere he couldn't otherwise reach. She'd burned her engines, spent her fuel, given every ounce of her strength to bring him across. And in the end, she'd absorbed the impact, taken the violence into her own structure, sacrificed herself so that he might survive. She'd brought him home. McKenna heard sirens in the distance, saw lights approaching through the forest, flashlights, vehicle headlights, the red and white strobes of emergency equipment. Voices called out, searching. He tried to shout, to signal his position, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. He reached into his breast pocket with trembling fingers, pulled out the photograph of his brother. The glass was cracked, spider-webbed across Michael's face, but the image was still visible beneath, still smiling in that way he had before the war took him, before Belgium, before everything. "I made it, kid," McKenna whispered, his words lost in the wind and the approaching sirens. "I crossed the whole damn ocean. I'm coming home." The lights found him. Men rushed forward, military police, medics, firefighters. Hands touched him, voices asked questions. Someone tried to take the photograph from his grip. He held on tighter, wouldn't let go, this one thing he'd carried across the Atlantic and through the crash and into whatever came next. A medic knelt beside him, young and competent, already cutting away his flight suit to assess injuries. "Sir, can you hear me?" "Sir, what's your name?" "McKenna," he managed. "Staff Sergeant Thomas McKenna." "Okay, Sergeant McKenna, you're going to be fine. We've got you now. Can you tell me where you're hurt?" McKenna almost laughed. Where wasn't he hurt? But he focused, tried to inventory the damage. Left leg. Broken. Ribs. Shoulder. Head. He paused. "But I made it. I crossed the ocean." The medic glanced at his partner, exchanged a look that said shock, possible head trauma. "Keep him talking." "Okay, Sergeant. Just stay with me. We're going to get you out of here." They lifted him onto a stretcher, strapped him down, carried him through the forest toward waiting ambulances. As they moved, McKenna caught glimpses of Lady Luck through the trees, her broken form illuminated by flashlights and vehicle lights, men in fire suits spraying foam on her ruptured fuel tanks, others standing back and staring at the wreckage with expressions that said they couldn't believe anyone had walked away from this. But he had walked away. Crawled away, more accurately. But he was alive. Against all probability, against regulations and sanity and the laws of aerodynamics, he was alive. They loaded him into an ambulance. The doors closed. The siren wailed. And as they drove toward the base hospital, McKenna held his brother's photograph against his chest and let himself finally believe it. He'd made it home. The military police found him 18 minutes after impact, sitting in the debris field with his back against a pine tree, still holding his brother's photograph. They approached with weapons drawn, voices sharp with authority, but when they saw the blood and the way his left leg bent at an impossible angle, their posture shifted from aggression to urgent efficiency. A medic arrived moments later, already working before his knees hit the ground. "Compound fracture, possible skull fracture, cracked ribs," he called to his partner. "We need to move him now." They loaded McKenna onto a stretcher and carried him through the forest toward waiting ambulances. Behind him, fire crews doused Lady Luck's wreckage with foam while officers gathered, their expressions mixing disbelief with anger. This was becoming the kind of incident that would generate reports and consequences that would echo for years. At the base hospital, doctors set his fractured tibia, stitched the gash above his eye, wrapped his cracked ribs, and pumped him full of morphine. When they tried to take Michael's photograph, McKenna's hand tightened around it. "It stays with me," he said, and they taped it to the operating table where he could see it as anesthesia pulled him under. When he woke hours later, a man in an Army Air Forces colonel's uniform sat beside his bed, reading through a thick folder. He looked up when McKenna stirred. "Staff Sergeant Thomas McKenna," the colonel said flatly. "I'm Colonel James Hartwell, Inspector General's office. Do you know how much trouble you're in?" "Yes, sir." "Theft of military aircraft. Desertion of post during wartime. Unauthorized flight across international waters. Destruction of government property." Hartwell closed the folder. "You'll be court-martialed. That's not in question. The only question is whether they throw away the key or just lock you up for a few years." "Yes, sir." Hartwell leaned forward. "I've spent 6 hours reading your service record. 53 combat missions. 2 distinguished flying crosses. Everyone says you were one of the best crew chiefs in the theater." He paused. "I also read about your brother, Second Lieutenant Michael McKenna, 101st Airborne. Killed in action near Overloon. They recommended him for a Silver Star posthumously." McKenna's throat tightened. He hadn't known that. "So help me understand," Hartwell continued. "Why would a man with your record throw it all away for a flight you knew was impossible?" How could he explain it? The distance. The numbness. The desperate need to close the gap between himself and his brother, even if it was too late. "My brother died," McKenna said finally. "And I wasn't there. I needed to try to get home." Hartwell was quiet for a long time. "I had a brother too. Navy pilot. Went down over Midway in '42. He stood, walked to the window. "I understand what you did. Not legally. Legally, it's inexcusable. But as a man who lost a brother, I understand." "What happens now, sir?" "Now you heal. Then court-martial at Westover Field. I'll testify about your service record, recommend leniency." He picked up his folder. "You'll probably get dishonorable discharge, lose your rank, serve time. But you'll survive it." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Your mother is on her way. She'll be here tomorrow. When you see her, tell her you made it home. Because that's what matters to her." His mother arrived the next afternoon, her face aged a decade since he'd last seen her. When she walked through the door and saw him alive, she rushed to his bedside and wept. McKenna told her everything: the letter, the decision, the crossing, the crash. He watched her move through shock and anger and fear and finally something like understanding. "You could have died out there," she said, "and I would have lost both my sons." "I know, Mom. I'm sorry. Michael wrote me a letter before he died. He said, 'Tommy always finds a way to do what needs doing, even when it's impossible.'" She squeezed his hand. "Whatever you did, however crazy it was, Michael would have understood." The court-martial convened on December 4th, 1944. McKenna stood at attention with his legs still in a cast, wearing a dress uniform without rank insignia. When asked how he pled, he said simply, "Guilty, sir. To all charges." The prosecutor argued for 10 years. McKenna's defense counsel presented his service record, his decorations, testimony from squadron mates. Colonel Hartwell testified about the missions McKenna had kept flying, about the men who came home alive because of his expertise. The panel deliberated for 40 minutes. The verdict was swift and merciless: reduction to private. Dishonorable discharge. 9 months confinement at Fort Leavenworth. McKenna's mother sat in the gallery, clutching Michael's handkerchief. She didn't cry, but her eyes found his across the room, and in them he saw not disappointment but understanding. He served 8 months at Leavenworth, working in the motor pool, fixing trucks instead of bombers. The war in Europe ended while he was inside. Then the Pacific. Men came home. McKenna was released on June 22, 1945. His mother met him at the prison gates, and for the first time since the crash, he wept. They drove back to Pennsylvania. McKenna got a job at Ferguson's garage, fixing cars for men who didn't ask too many questions. He met a girl named Sarah who'd known Michael, who understood grief. They married in 1947, had 3 kids, built a quiet life. He never flew again. Never talked about the flight. Never went back to Gander to see where Lady Luck had died among the trees. But every October 17th, he'd stand in his backyard and look up at the stars, remembering what it felt like to cross an ocean alone in a stolen bomber. He died in 1982, at age 61, in his sleep. His children found a spiral notebook in his desk, 147 pages detailing the entire story. They contacted the Air Force, verified the records. It was all true. The official report concluded with a single sentence that might have been condemnation or acknowledgement or both. This flight represents a remarkable feat of airmanship executed for unauthorized purposes. In 2004, on the 60th anniversary, McKenna's children traveled to Gander. They found the crash site deep in forest, trees now grown tall where Lady Luck had broken herself apart. His daughter placed a small plaque, in memory of B-24 Liberator 42 to 52,463 Lady Luck, and the impossible journey of October 17, 1944. She brought him home. Because that's what it had been, ultimately. An impossible journey by a man who had no right to attempt it, in an aircraft that gave everything to cross an ocean without orders. By any rational measure, it had been a disaster. A crime that deserved punishment. But he'd made it home. He'd crossed the ocean. He'd survived. And maybe crossing an ocean without orders wasn't about reaching the other side intact. Maybe it was about proving that some distances have to be traveled regardless of rules or consequences, because grief doesn't follow flight plans and love doesn't need official clearance. Lady Luck had taught him that. She'd given him a way to close the distance between himself and his brother, between duty and humanity, between the war that had taken Michael and the home that still existed beyond the Atlantic's far shore. She'd brought him home. And for a man lost in grief and the mechanical violence of war, home was worth everything.